Hi there. I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Lenin once said, "There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen." We are surely living through weeks where decades are happening. And how do we know? Journalists tell us, for they are the chroniclers of our times. Matt Cooper is with us. Matt is a premier journalist and a keen observer of the Washington scene. He has covered politics and the White House for Time, The New Republic, and many other notable publications. He is executive editor digital at the Washington Monthly and writes frequently for the magazine. The Washington Monthly is a political journal that challenges liberal and conservative orthodoxies, and for decades has been avidly read in the White House, Congress, and the city's newsrooms. From the White House to the Justice Department to the campaign trail, if there is something going on in our nation's capital, Matt can tell us about it. We are pleased to welcome Matt Cooper to the program. Matt, delighted to see you. And I thought we could start. You could tell us a little bit about the Washington Journal, how it got started and what is its strategy and mission.
Sure. Well, thanks, Jim. It's great to be here, and it's great to occasionally get the chance to edit you in the pages of the Washington Monthly. The magazine started in 1969. It was started by a man named Charles Peters, who had been a state legislator in West Virginia and who had worked on John F. Kennedy's important primary campaign there, which proved pivotal in his getting the Democratic nomination that year. And he followed Kennedy to Washington and had an important job at the Peace Corps, which Kennedy started as the director of evaluation there to try to figure out what works, what doesn't, inside that famous program. And after doing that during the Kennedy and then the Johnson administration, he decided to start a magazine called the Washington Monthly about how government really works, what really makes it tick, how to make it work. And at the same time, he challenged a number of liberal orthodoxies at the time. It seems funny now, but it had cover headlines like "Criminals belong in jail," which may seem self-evident to many, but at the time was considered rather shocking from a liberal-ish magazine. Anyway, he started the magazine, and he had a practice of recruiting bright young talent, a lot of whom have gone on to other things, including John Meacham and Taylor Branch, the political Pulitzer Prize-winning historians, James Bennett, the former opinion editor of the New York Times, James Fallows of the Atlantic, and many, many others. So it's got an august history, and it's managed to survive financially all this time. Not always easily. It's pretty small and pretty threadbare, but it continues to this day. And I worked here in my early 20s, back in the 1980s, and have returned now that I'm a much grayer and older guy, and having a great time with it.
Well, that's wonderful. I'm always fond of the anecdote about Kennedy campaigning in West Virginia against Hubert Humphrey, principally. It was a Stop Kennedy kind of campaign. And a man went over to Kennedy and he said, Kennedy was campaigning very, very hard. And he said to him, "Kennedy, I hear you haven't worked a day in your life. Let me tell you, you haven't missed a goddamn thing." So in any event, so now when did you join the Washington Monthly?
Well, I worked here when I was in my 20s, back in the late 1980s. For what is the standard 2-year stint. The magazine pays very little and asks the young editors who work here only to stay a couple of years, usually because they're getting much better offers after a while, and they can't afford to live on it for very long. So I worked here for a couple of years in the 1980s and then had a long career in magazines. I was, as you said at the top of the show, at Time Magazine and The New Republic. I was also at Newsweek. So I worked here then, and then late in my career, the editor of the magazine, Paul Glastris, who I had worked with when we were kids, asked me to come back and help help with the digital side of the magazine to help build our online audience and do that. So I've been doing that for a couple of years now.
Well, we now have a new world because we're in the digital age, and it's transformed journalism. And of course, you're executive editor digital for Washington Monthly.
Right.
What is the digital component of Washington Monthly, and what is it that you do day to day? What does your day look like?
Sure. Um, well, the Washington Monthly is still still a print magazine, um, but the Washington Monthly is online with new material every weekday. And what I try to do is get a good story up every day. We're not trying to get 10 stories up or even five, but we're trying to get at least one or two that are really good, that have the sort of, if not the length and the long lead times of the print magazine, at least it shares kind of the DNA of being smart and intelligent, reported. And so that's what I try to do every day, basically with a crew of freelance writers and whoever I can kind of hustle. I've been very lucky to have you, Jim, in a
You're very
page.
kind.
And
I'm lucky to have you, Matt.
I am very lucky to have you because really you were terrific. And so, I've been fortunate. I've been able to get some people who had made big names for themselves, like Margaret Carlson, who was the first female columnist at Time magazine, Chris Matthews, the former host of Hardball with Chris Matthews on MSNBC, and of course, a famous political writer himself. So I've been able to get folk, and then a lot of people, we do a lot of policy pieces. So I've been able to get a lot from the legal community, Jennifer Taub, who's a law professor, now going up to Michigan, but who's done a lot on corporate crime, white collar criminals. We've had her in a lot of Peter Shane, who's done a lot on regulatory stuff. So we try to really, we're not just covering the political scene, although we love it, but we're also trying to dig deep on policy and make sense of it for folks.
Now, every time somebody clicks on one of your articles or clicks on your homepage, a record is made of it. So you're able to tell what your circulation is, or now they talk about penetration.
Well,
Can you tell us
yeah,
something about that?
yeah. Well, it's interesting, of course. In the age of print, you knew who your subscribers were, or you knew your newsstand sales in a general way. Now you can have all kinds of information about how long someone is staying on the site. Did they come in for one story and stay for another? Did they come here because of social media like Twitter or Facebook? Or did they come here through the search engines? They were looking up Kamala Harris on Google and they got pointed our way. So it's kind of a whole science of trying to attract readers and trying to keep them interested. And it's not really bells and whistles so much as just I think good journalism. We're fortunate in the sense that we are not click driven. We are not dependent on getting a lot of people just to click on our site. Although we obviously want readers, and that's great, and so we're not averse to having a big audience, but we don't need to do the kind of clickbait stories. What this politician said will shock you. Click here to find out more. 10 most beautiful House members. We don't have to do anything like that to get clicks. Most of our money is from foundations. We have a fair amount from subscribers and individual donors too. Advertising is important, but it's digital advertising is down the list. We'd always want more, but we're not as dependent on click-driven stuff. So that makes my life a lot more pleasant than it might be
But it's a little
otherwise.
different from print journalism because if you buy a newspaper, they know you've bought a newspaper, I guess, but and they may hand it to somebody else. But that someone's clicked on your site and you know where they live and possibly who they are. You know a lot more about them than the whole demographic than you do with print journalism. Isn't that right?
Well, we know some things, some of which are fairly, don't have great utility, like whether they came to us on an iPhone or an Android phone or a desktop or a tablet, or through their as their carrier Verizon or AT&T. We know a lot of things that are, I guess potentially useful. We haven't really figured out a way to make them as such. But you do get a sense of kind of what's working and what's not. And I think like a lot of places we've suffered from what's been a big fall off for news organizations from the social media. I think the social media companies like Twitter and Facebook and many others have stopped pushing news stories as much in their so-called algorithms. So, we're not getting as much traffic as we might have once gotten from places like that. So it's a tricky thing. Obviously, we're always looking for more readers, and we're going to keep doing that. But fortunately, I think one of the nice things about the Washington Monthly is we don't have to pander and embarrass ourselves to try to get more readers.
Okay, now, in addition to being a terrific editor, and I can attest to that from personal experience, you write columns from time to time for the Washington Monthly, and as such, you certainly keep a close watch on what's going on in the world. So I thought I'd ask you for your horseback opinion as to where we are and where we're going in a number of areas. And we could start with the Middle East, where everyone is anticipating, they even thought today, a counterattack by Iran on Israel because Israel took out one of the leaders of Hamas while he was visiting Iran and was a guest of the regime. What's your assessment of the situation there?
Yeah, well, I'm not, one to guess what's going on in the minds of the mullahs in Tehran about what they have planned. I mean, it certainly seems like with a new government there, they're going to want to in Tehran, they're going to want to show they're tough and they're not taking us lying down from the West, and so they're going to do something. And I think the question is how big the response is. Is it show restraint, or is it more aggressive than what they did back in April when they sent 300 drones and other missiles towards Israel? The vast majority of which were shot down, and I believe only one person was seriously injured, which is remarkable given that much firepower aimed at the country.
300 drones and rockets.
Right, 300 drones and rockets, incredible. I don't know. It obviously with this many actors, this many alliances, this much firepower in the region, it feels incredibly dangerous. I think anyone who's studied World War One has got to be sort of thinking, my God, we've got these kind of, I don't know if they're formal alliances, but you've got, North Korean arms getting sent to Russia, and, the Iranians are supporting Russia, the Chinese are facilitating all that. We're helping, the Gulf states and Israel. There are a lot of alliances here, and I use the word, in its broadest sense. And I just think it's very easy for different parties to get brought into this conflict. Now, so far that hasn't happened, but it remains worrisome. And you've got a lot of actors, right, that are not entirely predictable. I mean, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis and the Yemen and such are you know supported by Iran, but I don't think they're entirely 100% controlled by Iran, from what I gather. I mean, I think there are a certain amount of wild cards, the way the Cubans were under the old Soviets.
That they
So,
receive arms and military
yeah, no
material.
question they are definitely clients of Iran, but I just mean Iran's control is
Not
not
complete.
yeah, not complete. So we saw that with various Russian Soviet clients during the Cold War. And so I don't know, Jim. I mean, it's awfully dangerous. It's, I think, incredibly sad for those who've been caught in the middle of this, that the Israeli hostages who were taken from their homes. Gazan civilians have been caught in the fighting. So it's rough.
Okay, so it is rough, and let's move on to the personality of the day, of the week, and you were at time maybe the woman of the year, Kamala Harris. What can you tell us about her amazing ascendancy?
I was thought going into the 2020 presidential election, where lots of Democrats were looking to depose Donald Trump. I thought she had a great resume and would be a very strong contender. She's was elected statewide as Attorney General and Senator from California. I thought she had an interesting record as a prosecutor. She initially took on a very tough race for Attorney General in California and won. I thought she'd be a more formidable figure, but she had a pretty bad initial presidential campaign. She was kind of all over the map on policy questions like the Bernie Sanders supported Medicare for all. She seemed to almost renounce her prosecutorial background, was, sort of flirting with the defunding the police movement and those who wanted to abolish the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency. So I thought she had just somewhat hapless campaign. And then when she was tapped for vice president, okay, she got elected. And then I think through a combination, not entirely of her own fault, but of being assigned really impossible tasks by her boss at the White House, working with the Central American countries where much more illegal immigration is coming from, to try to stop that flow, trying to pass a big voting rights bill in Congress that really would have required, abolishing the filibuster. She got asked to do some assignments that did not go well. And plus, frankly, her style was not exactly commanding. She seemed to gravitate towards a lot of sort of, liberal events, for lack of a better word. She did a lot of events about diversity, equity, and inclusion. She didn't do, by my mind, as many about crime or other things that might have played to her impressive career strengths. And I think she was really kind of lost. And I really did not see a great future for her after that. But I think I was wrong. Reporters have to say that when they are, and I think,
of course, Churchill was lost for many, many years before.
Well, yeah, exactly. You can be lost, and I think the Dobbs decision helped her find her voice. She became, as a woman, kind of the administration point person on abortion rights after the 2022 Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. And I think she kind of found her confidence there. And then in this period with Biden wavering and then taking himself out of the race, I just don't think she could have handled it any better. There was not a hint of disloyalty in trying to knife the boss. I mean, that I think would have been,
that would have been suicidal,
untoward and suicidal, but also hard to stay out of the fray when that kind of thing is going on down the hall. But she did, and there was all these people who were saying, "Oh, we need a mini primary. She can't just be coronated. We got to have everybody. We'll have Obama host a show and Clinton will host a show." I mean, every week someone had a new plan for a improvised primary system, and she just shut that all down. Now, that wasn't all her. I think some of it was just exhaustion, and some of it was Biden endorsing her and such. But she has done incredibly well since then, and she has really kind of found her voice. It's a cliche, I know, but she's kind of found her voice on the trail, and I think the Walls pick is playing well so far. And so, God, I didn't see it coming, but I think you got to say she's leading a bit here. It's still a close race. It's a very divided country. It's still a long way till election day, but at the moment, you'd have to say she's the favorite.
Well, you wrote an article early on where you said that Biden merited nomination and election, and you were pretty much all for Biden. And when he stepped out, it's a different picture. I mean, she's polling much better than Biden did
Well,
in any event.
well, I think no question. I think like a lot of people here at the Washington Monthly, we've been impressed by the amount of things that Biden has done in 4 years, and that it was a record of considerable accomplishment. I don't think we were unmindful of the political problems of an octogenarian seeking another term, but uh, we also felt he wasn't really always getting credit for what he had done. Um,
Well,
yeah,
there were many
I
cries that he should get out of the race for the good of the country, but now it appears he was forced out by the Democratic leadership for the good of
well,
the party to for the
I think
down
that's
ballot
right.
candidates.
I mean, he didn't want to go, and but I think Nancy Pelosi and others were able to finesse it. I think one of the most telling moments will be when after about maybe 10 days after the debate where he seemed to have a medical episode on camera. I say that not as a physician, just as an observer. He just really seemed to kind of lose it there for a while. Um, he it looks like he was at least going to hold on. He sent a letter. He took some meetings with members of Congress, and he pushed back, and he sent a letter to the Hill and said, "I'm not going anywhere. This is it. I'm in." And it was sort of it was a little, it was a little suicide bomber. It was a little like, if you keep tearing me down, there's no way we're going to win. So I'm in. Let's just stop fighting about it. And that was kind of the undertone, the subtext of what he wrote.
You
But I,
you wrote another column where you argued that he should resign the presidency if he quit the race.
well, I did say that, and that was in part because I thought Harris was so weak. And again, I think I was wrong about that. I thought she would be in a much stronger position if she was the incumbent. And if it also one, it would just get rid of the questions about whether he's fit to be president for another 6 months. I mean, I think he is, but it would eliminate those questions altogether. And second, I think just she would not seem scary to some if she was already Madam President. And it would sort of cement his legacy, right? He will have handed off his seat to the first woman, first African American, first South Asian. So I thought there was a lot to commend it. The downside was, you couldn't confirm a vice president in time. The Republicans would block it because it has to go through both houses. You'd have Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, a heartbeat from the presidency. I thought overall it was worth the risk of that, but as it turned out, I think it's probably is better he didn't do that. So
Well, when you
uh,
wrote the column, would have been some lead time before the election, but by the time he resigned, it was less than a month to the convention. I mean,
yeah,
time was getting quite short.
time was getting shorter. It's true, but it goes to show. I mean, I think when you're a journalist and you venture your take on things, you have to be prepared to sort of say when you thought you were wrong, and I've had my share of that.
So I have to ask you. You said it's a close election, but are happy days here again for the Democratic Party?
Well, I think so, but I don't know. So I mean, I think the Trump shtick is wearing a little thin. I think like anything, it's you know, it's what's the old phrase? It starts as a cause, it becomes a business, and ends as a racket. I think he got to racket pretty quickly,
Well, he
and I
sounds like a Borscht Belt comedian where you've heard all
yeah,
the
and
jokes.
and I think, but not as fun as he once was.
You know,
I think it's all about him. I mean, it's all about his legal problems and his woes and how they're unfair to him. I mean, he did a lot of that in 2016, but at least there was a little bit of little bit about you in there. Uh, I don't know. I mean, I never want to say he's yeah. I mean, look, he can still win. I think it's harder. I think it's harder for him to do it, but we'll see. I think she's really galvanized the anti-Trump coalition, which is all the Democrats and little handful of Republicans and good swath of independents. And I think there is an
It,
anti-Trump coalition out there.
it could do it. Well,
It could, but and I think they got a fair number of let's say eccentric candidates down ballot in some of these swing states. North Carolina, I mean, they've got some loopy people running that I think is going to that is a state to watch, because I really think that they've put so many loopy people on the ballot that I think that will hurt Trump.
the MAGAs did. Okay,
Yeah.
well, the only thing that is certain is that we've run out of time. This
Yeah.
has just been wonderful. And
Thank you, Jim.
thank you for coming by. Thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Be well, take care, and all the best.